Hi friends, and welcome to Vishebility Talk, where we explore careers, showcase businesses, and celebrate the Black women pushing through in these spheres. My name is Mary Mashakwa-Adeyemi. I am the founder of Vishebility and the host for this conversation. As you know, this is season 2 of our talk show, and here we're exploring intersectional leadership through a Black and female lens by having conversations with Black women in leadership roles across a wide range of sectors and spaces. What we want to explore is their journey to leadership, the good, the bad, the ugly, their current or evolving leadership style and ethos, and their advice on how other women can embrace and execute their own leadership journey. I'm super excited today because I'm in conversation with a woman who I have been really angling to meet for a while. And as one of only a few, like a really handful of Black female MDs working in leading investment banks in the UK, Elsie Akisanya is personally inspiring to me and a real role model. So I'm really excited to dig in, but let me give you a brief introduction of her so you know what we're working with here. So Elsie is a seasoned human resources professional with experience in a variety of sectors, including financial services, research, and pharmaceuticals. She's currently occupying the seat of Managing Director at Citibank, serving as the Global Head of HR for the Treasury and Trade Solutions business, as well as the Cluster HR Officer for Turkey, Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. Prior to this role, Elsie was the Global Talent Manager for Citi's Transaction Services High Potential Talent Program. Before joining Citigroup in July 2010, Elsie worked as a Senior HR Manager for Fidelity International and was HR Director for Market and Opinion Research International, aka MORI, for 5 years. Prior to that, she was Associate Director HR for Quintiles International, one of the world's largest pharmaceutical research companies. Elsie is an accomplished executive coach and is on Citi's coaching faculty for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. She's a non-executive director of the board of Hyde Housing and chair of its Remuneration and Appointments Committee. Elsie is an inclusion and belonging advocate, and we're going to talk a lot about what that means. And she was the prior co-chair of City Roots, City's multicultural diversity network in London. Elsie holds a bachelor's degree in English and linguistics and a master's degree in human resource management. She's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development and a member of the Association of Coaching UK. She lives in Surrey in the UK with her husband and her 2 sons. Elsie Akisanya, welcome to Vishebility.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, I'm so excited as well. So you know, like where people see each other on LinkedIn and we kind of stalk each other quietly. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to get to speak to her today. So I woke up very, very excited. So thank you for saying yes. I know you get a lot of these invitations and you have to pick and choose which one. So I'm glad we didn't make it to the no list.
No, I very rarely say no. Very rarely say no.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, I like to do these things because they're fun as well as being, good.
And hopefully it gives you an opportunity to kind of introspect a bit. I feel like when I do them, I'm always like, actually, I just feel like I got to know myself a little bit more just in that conversation.
100%. Yeah.
Awesome. So Elsie, I read out your bio. But what would be great to start with is kind of hearing about you from your own perspective. So when you were a little girl, what did you dream for yourself?
Oh, do you know what? I love this question because I have no choice but to be my authentic, very authentic self. So when I was little, actually when I was about 7, my mum put me on a plane to London on my own as an unaccompanied minor, as it was called then. And that was one of many trips that I would make to the UK by myself. Yes, you got to travel with family, but occasionally either family was in Nigeria or family was in the UK and I'd have to make a trip. And in those trips, there is a point to the story. In those trips, I would be looked after by the air hostesses.
Right.
When I was little, my dream job was to be an air hostess.
Oh.
Because these were the people who looked after me whenever I was in the air and made sure I was okay and made sure I was taken through, all this stuff that now you have to pay for fast track or unless you're traveling business, first. Then, I just went through. I didn't even know half of the stuff that was happening.
Yeah.
And so I just loved the idea of being an hairdresser. And I love to travel.
Yeah.
And I love to travel and I love to travel now.
Oh,
One
yeah.
of the things I miss most about the pandemic was not being able to get on a plane. So yeah, when I was little, it was all about being a hair hostess. And then clearly life moved on and things changed. And went to university, and I got my degree in English and linguistics. And I have to be honest, I didn't know what to do with it when I graduated. So that was what I wanted to be when I was a little girl.
Oh, nice. I like that. I think it really just speaks to that. And then the idea, I always say, like, when you see something, it like really sparks that interest.
Absolutely.
What was your family structure like? And actually, what was the reason why you were having to travel?
So interestingly, my mother came to England to further her education when I was about, I don't know, 8. So she was here. I was in Nigeria with my grandmother. So my grandmother looked after me. And so whenever she had a break from school or whatever, and she wasn't coming back to Nigeria, I would come over here.
Right.
And so I actually moved to England when I was 8, lived here till I was about 10, 11, and then moved back to Nigeria, went to boarding school, went to Federal Government Girls College in Benin. Boarding school was a revelation. Yes, especially
Put it lightly.
put it lightly. But went to FGC Benin, and then went straight from secondary school to university. So I will date myself here. I went to school at a time where you could go straight to university from your GCSEs.
Oh, wow.
Your O-levels. And I did my O-levels when I was 15.
Right.
So I went to uni that year when I was still 15. And so I graduated when I was 90. I did a 4-year degree course because you don't have A-levels, then you have to do 1 year preliminary. And then your degree course is 3 years, so 4 years in total. So I graduated at 19, moved to England because by then my whole family lived in England. So my mum was here, my brother was here, everybody was here. So I came to England, I was 19, had no clue what I wanted to do with this degree. Everybody assumed that I was going to teach. I knew I was never going to teach because I am incredibly impatient and probably would have been arrested on the back of not looking after somebody's child properly. But I did, when I came over, I did a temporary job at London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham's council. And then it was what was then called their personnel department. I'm dating myself again. But what was great about that temporary job was that you saw the whole spectrum of what was then personnel, call it human resources. So you saw everything from recruitment to learning and development to employee relations to all the aspects of HR. And I thought to myself, oh, now this is interesting, because this could be a career, not a job. Right. And I knew I wanted a career. I didn't want a job. I'd seen people with just jobs. Yeah. That wasn't for me. I wanted something that had longevity. Yeah. So that was what sparked the thought of going to do human resources. And then I went to do my master's at Westminster. And actually that was we were the first cohort of human resource management postgrad at Westminster University. So
it's interesting you tell that story. My dad always made that, he always pressed on that difference for me, like, don't have a job, have a career. And in many ways, that was actually why I went to qualify as an accountant, because his whole thing was like, anybody can be in business, but if you are qualified as an accountant and you have a career, but who or what impressed in you, like that difference, like job versus career so early on?
It wasn't a person. I don't think it was a person. It was more seeing people who had jobs.
Right.
And knowing that was not what I wanted. And you'll find as we continue our conversation, I think that's one of the aha moments I've had whenever I've had time to introspect. Yeah. It's always been, oftentimes for me, it's not seeing it wasn't always about seeing what was possible. It was seeing what I didn't want.
Right.
So I oftentimes I know what I don't want. Might not know what I do want, but I
Yeah, like at
absolutely
least
know
not
what I
that.
don't want.
Yeah.
And you know, and that permeates all aspects for me, whether it's leadership, etc., etc., etc. It's always about that's not the path for me,
Yeah.
and pivoting and thinking about what is a path for me and being quite intentional about those things.
Wow. Wow. That's awesome. But yeah, I mean, even when, yeah, that is actually easier to think about it that way. Like there's a world of things that you could want, but I think it's actually more finite when you realize what I just, at least I don't want that part.
Yeah, absolutely.
Start eliminating and making your options a little smaller.
100%. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting actually that you talk about human resources and personnel management as interesting, because one of the things that attracted you to when you were younger being an air hostess is the fact that you were being cared for by someone. I kind of see sort of this through line in what maybe matters to you. I mean, perhaps some of your value sets around sort of care
100%.
And things like that. So you've had now a successful, 25-year career in human resources. Like, so what has if you take sort of an out of body view of your career, how do you feel it is differed from perhaps what you expected it to be? Both in the good or perhaps in maybe the more challenging ways.
You know, if I think at the start of the journey was actually really quite tough because, you know, I talk about deciding I wanted to do human resources and I wanted to do a master's. I guess to fill in some of those gaps was that when I was applying to Westminster, because it was a part-time master's degree course, one of the requirements was that you were working in a personnel department,
right.
And I wasn't. I was working in a council tax department at this point in time. So there was a race to get a job in a human resources department in time to start this program that I had been offered. Right, the program, you know, your acceptance was conditional upon you working, you know, because it was a part-time master's. They wanted to leverage your real life examples with the theory that you were being taught, so that they could marry it and bring it together. And so I had this this window of time between getting accepted. I think it was March of that year, and starting the program, which was I think end of September, to find a job in human resources. And I honestly can tell you that I must have applied to 100 jobs. I must have interviewed for at least 20, landed one. Literally landed one in August of that year, just in time to start my program. So one of the key challenges was positioning myself to be able to do that program. And then when I finished that program, knowing that I had outgrown that role that I was in, I'm trying to find the next professional role, because the role I landed was very junior. And by the way, I'm not dismissing that, because today, the reason I can roll up my sleeves and get stuck into anything, right, is because I've done that. I know how to do it. And also nobody's going to pull the wool over my eyes with anything. I know the skinny.
You've done your job before.
I know the skinny, right? So no wool. But you know, getting that next professional job again, you know, multiple applications for roles, and then landing the one. So the early years were all about finding that next. Finding that space where you could grow, finding that space where you could develop, finding that space where you could really stretch and build some muscle, and some intellectual capital behind you. Those early years were pretty tough. So I think, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so it does to an extent, but I wanted to go further into just now as you've grown. How do you define what pathways, for example, you wanted to go? Because HR, people talk about HR almost like just like one, but it's actually such a wide space. So how did you find like how you wanted to grow, whether it be a HR business partner or work in some other area?
No,
Yeah.
good question. And I have to be honest, from very early on, I knew that I wanted to be a generalist. I wanted to be an advisor. I wanted to partner with the business, and different organizations call it different things. But for me, as always being part of a business, being that trusted advisor, being that voice around that table that would advise, stakeholders, business heads around the human capital agenda. I did have furies into talent, as you'll have seen from my CV. Talent for me, talent, succession planning, development, those are what I call sweet spots, right? They are, if you ask me, bar none, which job have I enjoyed the most, right? The job that I did managing the global talent program for City Transaction Services, hands down. It was fun. I had a very nice budget. I was knocking the ball out of the park with pulling together multi-layered, really talented people, partnering them with external education suppliers. So I worked with Wharton, I worked with Duke, I worked with ESA, I worked with Imperial to bring together real thought leadership to the program that I was leading. Hands down the best job from a fun perspective.
Right.
But actually, was that job going to grow me in the way that I needed to be grown and stretched? No. So it was good. And I knew it was for a finite period of time. So for me, I've always known that being at the table, having an equal voice with the business heads, but as a subject matter expert in human capital management, was always the thing that I wanted to do. I didn't want to be in a talent acquisition specialist or an employee relations specialist or a compensation. In fact, no. I always knew that it was being at that table and bringing and being the person who brought the whole subject matter expertise distilled into one voice at that table. So.
No, I like the distinctions you're making, but let me press further just for some are really we have a very young audience who are really just trying to figure out like careers, like all of the nooks and crannies. So as a generalist, what does that look like day to day versus someone who was, say, in like talent acquisition and like succession planning, as you called it?
Okay, so what I can tell you and why I love it is no 2 days look the same.
Right.
So if I walk you through my Thursday started with me interviewing somebody at 8 o'clock in the morning for a job that I have on my team. I was in a 2-hour meeting with our EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa HR senior leadership team, looking at our human capital strategy, but more importantly, looking at our return to work strategy post-pandemic. I spent the next 6 hours co-facilitating a new leadership assimilation program with an external supplier because the business I support, we had a new leader start with us at the start of this year. And 6-8 months in, we try to bring the whole group together for them to know a little bit more about the leader, for them to ask him questions, for him to really finesse the team before we start moving forward. Co-facilitated that for 6 hours. That was Thursday. Wednesday looked very, very different. No 2 days look the same. And that's why I love it, because I touch everything from talent acquisition to learning and development to looking at employee relations issues and how do we solve those, looking at pay and compensation, looking at overall performance. It touches everything. It's a little bit of everything. That's why I love it so much. But when I did the talent role, what I loved was just being able to focus on one part and being able to go deep. So in my current job, for example, I wouldn't be able to spend time with, external suppliers thinking about how to provide a really best-in-class program for our senior leaders. I can't do that in my current job. I would have to speak to my learning and development partner and ask them and give them the brief to say, here's what I'm trying to achieve. Right. Go find for me who's the best in class to do that for me. Yeah. And then maybe they'll put two in front of me and then I'll make a decision. But they do the digging. I can't do that in my job.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the difference. Yeah. It depends on how deep you want to go in a specific subject.
Yeah. No, I like the distinction you just made. And I guess it also makes a really good case for sort of earlier in your career, perhaps actually starting as a generalist and then deciding like perhaps what you might enjoy. And then, you know, you could then go deeper, you know, as opposed to going the other way, because it feels like, yeah, one way is more effective than the other.
You know what? I think it's different for different people. So I know people who started in compensation and benefits, and that's just what they love, right? They love the numbers. They love thinking about the regulatory infrastructure around compensation. They love all of that stuff. Yeah. And you know what? We need them. I need people like that, because they help me, you know, think through things that I wouldn't necessarily think about. So I think, you know, I have lots of people who, like yourself, trained as accountants, but they're in our compensation department within HR, right? So it takes lots of different skill sets to come into human resources.
Yeah, no, that's interesting actually, because I never considered that. I always just thought they usually tend to come from a more social science background.
No. Oh, interesting. No. It's interesting. I was talking to a colleague of mine. I was telling her about my son who just got accepted to King's, and she was saying she went to King's and she did pharmacy, and she's a peer. She's a colleague.
Yeah.
Takes all sorts.
Yeah, takes all sorts. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now like kind of thinking about highlights and perhaps lowlights in your journey. Are there any examples that stick out to you of like a time when failure or apparent failure kind of set you up for like later success? Or should I say, do you have a favorite failure?
Oh no, there's no favorite failures. There are many failures. But you know what? And I say this, and I genuinely mean it. It's not trite. We learn so much more in failure than we do from success, and especially failure when you don't see it coming. Like failure where you are flying 1 minute and the next minute you're flat on your face. Yeah. And so maybe I'll give a couple of examples. When I worked, one of which will remain nameless, one of the employers that I worked with, my first year, probably first 18 months, was just a shambles. I just didn't get the language. I didn't get the culture. I didn't understand so many nuances. And you didn't have anybody to tell you, like someone to pull you into a corner and say, just in case you weren't aware. Didn't have any of that. And I literally was floundering on my own, to the extent that I remember having an appraisal. And this is me, you know, I was already pretty successful at this point. I'm not talking about early days. I'm talking, you know, maybe 15 years ago. We won't mention time. And I remember thinking, I know my stuff. What is going on? And it wasn't the technical stuff, because I knew my stuff. Mm-hmm. It was the soft things. And I think that's one of the things, as we come into this discussion, I'd love to chat a little bit more about. Just the culture of an organization, your fit into that organization, your ability to navigate. I completely, 18 months, floundered in that space. Yeah. It was horrific. Like I used to come home and my poor husband, who is just a rock star, literally had to just keep me propped up in all of that time, because I would wake up literally and not want to go into work. That's never happened to me. I work. Yeah. I've never wanted that, but I felt like such a failure. It was awful. Yeah. But then something turned. My business changed. My business partner changed. The business partner and I got on famously.
Right.
He allowed me to have a voice at his table. My confidence grew, my how grew. I started to navigate the organization better. I actually left that organization on a real high.
Yeah.
But the first 18 months, they were awful.
Yeah.
And I honestly failed. I mean, I didn't fail to the extent that, you know, my appraisal was a write-off, but I remember walking out of an appraisal in tears, not because my appraiser had said that you didn't do this right, wrong, or the other, but just because I knew by my standards that I wasn't delivering what I expected of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I can really resonate with that story.
Good.
I'll tell you more off camera, but that really just made a lot of sense to me. Because I transitioned after working same organization for over almost 11 years, transitioned to a new place, and yeah, my first like 12 months was just like a shock, and no one could have prepared me for that. So yes, I think that story really, but really stresses the importance of, I guess, in many ways, like doing your research and picking the right company, the right culture. But even when you do that, you still don't know what you're going to get. And until you get in, because as you said, it's not the organization. It was, you know, perhaps when you change business partners, you guys just work better. And it was the same organization, but completely different, with night and day between the first 18 months and then sort of the following. Yeah. That's a great story. Definitely resonate with that. And so, like, kind of wrapping up a little bit on your sort of background and journey so far, I always find that when I talk to people like you, there are always these moments, these really pivotal moments where like you can almost pinpoint like this was time when things, like everything kind of took off. So is it possible for you to isolate sort of one or two of those experiences where you feel like it really made a difference to your trajectory in your career?
There were a couple, and the common denominator in all of them is around sponsorship. And that's why I feel really passionate about sponsorship as opposed to mentoring, right? Part mentoring. So my time at City, I've been very fortunate to have some really good senior sponsors. But if I think about where things really took off was when a business leader who had a new business that was, you know, flagship at City said to me, "I want you to be my HR business head." Like literally just pulled me aside and said, "Here's the thing, you're the person." And in that moment, so many things collapsed for me. One was, oh, okay, so I do know my gig, because you do sometimes think, oh, why don't I? And in that moment, there was that aha of, okay.
The extra boost of like the stamp of approval.
Someone knows, people know your value.
Yeah.
And that encourages you to be the very best version of yourself every day.
Yeah.
So that probably was the most recent. And this happened quite a few years back. But if I think about it, whether it was in the other organization that I shared with you, having that new business partner who really brought you in and wanted to hear your voice, was key. If I think about each time I got promoted in any of my other organizations, it was always about that external validation confirming what you know inside, and the two coming together.
Yeah.
Because you can know, or you can think you know, but unless other people know it and articulate it, actually it's just your self-perception.
Yeah.
So for me, those were the times. And of course, when I got promoted to MD, that was, I was really very, very happy. Yeah, I lived on that high for a good 6 months, I think. I really did.
Very deserved high. Like it's not easy.
No,
Definitely,
no.
it's not easy. So I think that that's actually a good place to then pivot to your time at City. 10 years now, just like over 10 years. You know, getting
11. It was 11 in July.
Oh, really? Oh,
I
wow.
know.
So securing like a global head role 2013, your MD title in 2017. Congratulations. You know, what did that journey really and that transition like look like for you? And specifically, like what changes did you feel like you had to make to be better prepared for that step up?
So the interesting thing for me when I came to City was I came to City at quite a seasoned HR professional anyway. I didn't go to City as a junior. I went to City as an SVP. I was looking after an EMEA business. So I'd had different levels of success already by the time I got to City. I'd been a director at Mori, I'd been associate director before that. So always pretty good. But I think when you land in a very big pond, you are a very little fish.
Yeah.
You're a very, very little fish. And so in that pond, trying to prove your worth in an organization of over 200,000 people is not an easy thing to do. And I think that journey was really accelerated because of multiple organizational changes that happened with the businesses that I supported, the changes in leadership that happened that led to changes in HR coverage. So these changes gave me opportunities to showcase what I could do. And then, of course, you know, being having sponsors, having mentors. And and I'll share this, one of the mistakes I made very early on in City, but that thankfully was very quickly corrected, was that my relationships and alignments were much more with the business than within my function.
Right. Okay.
And so my business knew me. They thought I was the best thing since sliced bread. Nobody in HR really knew me.
Right.
And what thankfully corrected that relatively early was that there was a high potential mentoring program that was created within the HR community. Mm-hmm. And I got allocated a mentor. Right. And in that allocation, a mentor within HR. And that person started to proactively work with me to ensure that, you know, I got known within the HR community. And that's how I started to build up my network. And so I think that really helped my trajectory, both from an HR perspective as well as a business perspective. And I think the other thing was I started, as I became much more senior, to be intentional about advocacy. So I used to talk about race. So it's really interesting when last year the whole Black Lives Matter situation blew up. I was like, I've written papers on this 5 years ago. Yeah. Right? This is news. Yeah. People, this is not news. But because I had been intentional along that journey, it was very natural when all of this happened last year for, you know, the HR leadership to seek me out and say, right, we need you to do this and we need you to do that. And that was fine. But, you know, long before race and ethnicity became a topic, it was a topic I've been working on, advocating in internally for years, and leaning into it was very uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. I will be 100% transparent about, very uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But I felt it was important and it was necessary. I was also the co-chair of City Roots at some point in time. So all of those things enabled my visibility internally to really grow.
All right. No, I hear you. Very difficult time, I think, really for most Black people in the workplace last year. You know, at one point, I think after that week or so, I think I just went off social media just because I just couldn't cope with all of the stimulus. But yeah, but similar. I mean, I'd been running Vishebility probably for 2 years prior, and doing a lot of you know, inclusion work for years, and so it just felt like yeah, well, we've been talking about this for years. Why is it a surprise? Like, I don't understand this part. But, you know, with that kind of meant you had a more convicted voice when it came to this. You're like, yeah, we've been talking about this for like, I have statistics, I have reports, I have papers, I have, you know, have all these things that now I could just throw at you and we
Yep.
can, you know, get this conversation moving at a more senior level. So I like that. I want to pick up on something that you mentioned around sort of, I guess, sponsorship at first, and then the fact that you were given a mentor. So maybe picking on the second part first, do you feel it's as effective to be allocated a mentor like through a sort of structured program than finding one yourself?
And I'm not dodging the question, but I will say, I think it's both.
Right.
I think it's both, because I think if in an organization, within a program, and if it's a really well run and structured program, and I run one globally, so I can tell you that I give it a lot of thought. You have to be clear about what is the objective of this program? What is it designed to do? Because if it's just designed to connect two people, any two people can do that. But if you're clear about the objective of the individual, what is the individual trying to get out of this relationship? And as an organization, what problem are you solving for?
Mm-hmm.
If you can bring those two agendas together, you can create a really powerful mentoring sponsorship program.
Yeah.
It's when it's just an ad hoc, we've got a group of mentees, we've got a group of mentors, pop them together and off you go. Mm-hmm. To me, that lacks a little bit of oomph. But if you're really quite clear about the objective, you're really quite strategic in the thought process around what you're trying to deliver, I think that being allocated can be very, very powerful. Mm-hmm. I also think it's important as individuals for us to reach out and say to people, do you know what? I've seen something of you that I really like, and would you please mentor me? But it always go with your why.
Yeah.
Maybe I can share my example. When I was when I got appointed to the board of Hyde, I've never been a non-executive director on a board before. I knew what I didn't know. And so early on, I think in my first year, I went to the National Housing Federation's, they have a session for non-exec directors. It was a 2-day program. It was up in Manchester, I think it was up in Manchester, went up to Manchester, went series of sessions. And there was somebody who was a speaker in one of the sessions I was part of. And actually, as she talked, her background was so similar to mine. She'd been in banking for many, many years, had left banking, but has been on the boards of at least 3 housing associations. And I thought, this person my journey will resonate with her, but I can learn so much from her. And afterwards, I went up to her and I, introduced myself, got her name, blah, blah, blah. And we connected. And I asked her, would you please, this is my first year as a NED. I've never done this before. Would you be open to mentoring me? Okay. And she said yes. So I was very clear as to what I was asking her to mentor me for. Yes. It wasn't just, I really like you. Yeah. Like, no. You don't know me. How do you know that you like me?
Yes. Yeah.
So being quite intentional about your why is really important. Yeah. And when people come to me for mentoring or approach me and say, would you, I always say, well, why? What is it that you're trying to get out of this relationship so that we can be on the journey together?
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers.
Absolutely. No, it does. It absolutely does. Yeah, I always say, like, the fact that one person is thriving in one area doesn't mean that they're like a role model for every other area, because there might be some questionable choices that you don't want. Yeah. So it's definitely be very specific as to like why you think this person can provide you guidance in what specific area. I think that's helpful. And then turning to like that concept of sponsorship. So I was listening to this podcast the other day, and they were saying, mentorship is like, it's a gift. So that, there's no expectation of anything back. It's just kind of goodwill, but like sponsorship is this investment, where there's a lot more expected of you. And in many ways, the giver or the investor of the sponsorship is really expecting a lot out of you, as almost like as a quid pro quo. So how would you advise people to make themselves sponsorable? Because I'm guessing.
I'm going to disagree a little bit with that podcast that you heard.
Please.
I hate to be controversial, but I'll go for it. I sponsor loads of people. I don't really expect anything back.
Right.
And I've been sponsored, as I've said, by so many people who have really paved the way for me. And I don't believe they expect anything back, but for me to be the very best version of myself in the spaces that they put me.
Right.
I think their expectation when they sponsor me is, Elsie, go knock that ball out of the park.
Yeah.
That's the expectation. And so if that was what was meant, then yes, I would agree with that 100%. Because, when I've sponsored juniors who've worked for me and I've taken them into really senior meetings, right? My expectation is you listen, you learn, you leverage that learning and use it the next time. You use it to connect the dots, right? That's, for me, that's what sponsorship is about. Mm-hmm. And sponsorship is also for people to, I guess, be your advocates in rooms where you don't get to be in. Yeah. And they speak for you, but you've got to give them something to speak for you about.
Yeah.
You've got to give them that ammunition. And so I always think, again, personal view here, but I always think that the people I sponsor, I expect them to deliver the goods. Mm-hmm. And if they're not going to deliver the goods, I need to understand why, because do you know what? Life happens and stuff happens, and we're not always on our A game. And that's okay, but manage my expectations. Yeah. And equally, that's how I treat my sponsors. If a sponsor says to me, Elsie, I'd really like you to consider this opportunity, and I know in my head that gig's not for me, I want to be able to manage that person's expectations to say, do you know what? I'm so flattered that you think I can do this, but actually I don't want it. Yeah. Clearly not in those words. Yeah. But it's not for me. And so I think there is something about sponsorship being, I agree, an investment, because it's a lot of time that you spend with individuals, enabling them, facilitating them, showcasing them, right? Ensuring that you give them platforms that they can showcase themselves. All of those things are investments because you take a risk.
Yeah.
The sponsor takes a risk on you every time they showcase you.
Yeah.
And you don't want them to be disappointed.
Mm-hmm. So you do agree with the statement?
Well,
maybe not positioned in that language, but I guess like good performance, definitely. Because I'm guessing
if that was related to performance, 110%. Because you're putting your brand at risk.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Every time you say X is amazing, X can deliver, blah blah blah, you're putting yourself, literally, you're leveraging your own social capital on that person. 100%.
Yeah. Okay, good. You agree.
All right, I agree.
Okay. We've talked about race in the context of the events of last year and sort of the awakening that became the George Floyd event in corporate spaces, and the surprise that it was for a lot of other people who didn't identify, I guess, as Black. Have you ever felt like in your career that your goals or ambitions were perhaps perceived differently because of your race or your gender?
Do you know, I always give this a lot of thought. And I'm going to answer you really, really honestly. I am sure it has been. But I guess because, and I shared with you my early years, I was raised in an environment where you could be anything and anything you wanted to be. So I've never come into the workplace thinking that I am less than,
Yeah.
or should be considered less than. And I've always treated people who have had that view as, do you know what, that's your problem and I'm not going to make it mine.
Yeah.
So have there been incidents, but more than I care to think about? Everything from, we've now got labels for all of these things. So the microaggressions, right? Everything from you say something and nobody pays a peep. Your colleague says exactly the verbatim
And
the same
everyone's
thing.
like nodding, saying, "Oh, that's a great idea." And you're like, "Hold on."
But I guess I always have looked at it as, that's your problem. I'm not going to make it mine.
Yeah.
Always chosen that space. And also, when I moved to England, one of the earliest things I very quickly learned was you got to outperform to be on an even platform. So you're not running an equal race. You're running a race where you've got several things holding you back, but you're still running that race.
Right.
And so being really clear in your mind around, what am I striving for here? What am I trying to achieve here? And what does great look like, has always been my approach. So I'm sure at certain points in my career, and in fact, I can name 2 or 3, right, where people have assumed stuff about me until they got to know me.
Yeah.
And so when they're still in that assumption phase, I don't allow their assumptions to impact me. Mm-hmm. I do what I do me, and I let them figure out me when they get to that point.
Yeah. No, excellent. I was actually going to ask you a question about how you use your voice sort of authentically, but yet sort of effectively, because, we know about bias and, all of these things you talked about already. So I think you've actually already answered that question, just in terms of how you handle that, just the perception of, women being too emotional, not able to make decisions, especially as Black women, being tagged as aggressive, disruptive, angry, all of these sort of labels. And, that could force you to shy away from speaking up when you really do have a valid opinion. You just start thinking, but I don't want to be tagged, that type of thing.
I think I've also learned, and you learn different things in different organizations. So I've worked in British firms, I've worked with American firms, and you actually learn to calibrate and position yourself based on the cultural nuances of the organization that you work in. So, I work in an American bank, right? And there's a phrase about having sharp elbows, right? I'm sure you're familiar with it. Effectively means, you're forceful, you get what you need to get, it done. But that could be perceived as a negative. And there is a way to, within every organization, understand what is culturally acceptable. What is the culturally acceptable way to raise a counter perspective, to raise a different perspective, to share a view, and you can still be really respectful. You can still listen to others. You can still pick out what's relevant from what other people have said to bolster your argument. There is a way you position your point of view that allows people to listen to you.
Yeah.
And there is a way you can position yourself that actually shuts people down, because you've gone in all guns blazing. They're not going to listen to you. Forget your color, forget your race, forget your gender. They're not going to listen to you. Yeah. Because you've gone in a way that is counterintuitive to that organization's norms.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you do any, like, does that way of communicating come naturally to you, or did you do anything to like really improve that?
So no, it does not come naturally to me. I will be 100% honest. When I did my coaching course, I did a coaching course for a year. So I'm a certified coach. And one of the things I really learned was about intentional listening. And I am an intentional listener. I will often mirror words that people have said in their conversation to demonstrate that I've actually heard what they're saying. And sometimes I'll ask questions. I will say, did you mean, here's what I heard.
Right.
Is that what you were trying to say? Because people, we all want to be listened to, ultimately. We all want to be heard. And if we're not being heard, it's very easy to shut down or at least filter for only the information that you want. So no, it didn't come naturally to me, but I think that I was learning it as I grew in my career. But I think that pivot point for me was when I did that course on coaching, and I realized that there is a way to listen to people that enables you to engage with them at a much more deeper level. And learning to ask questions for clarity and understanding is so key in then being able to communicate with people effectively. And I think that's one of the reasons I probably have been more successful than possibly I could have been.
Yeah. I that resonates, and I agree, and I see that because ultimately, I was reading this book the other day called "We're All Marketers," and just the idea that at every point you're either buying something or you're selling something, and even when you communicate, you're selling something, you're selling someone your idea, but you're also being asked to buy theirs, and it's that negotiation, right? In the moment of trying to let them know I've heard you, and this is what you said, but this is where I'm coming from, and how do we meet in the middle? Is the barter of ideas. So I think, and it's definitely one of the secrets, or I guess should I say the open secrets of most marketers that we should probably be applying to our lives. So I mean, we're here talking about sort of intersectional leadership, and we've talked about your journey and so many nuggets. But I wanted to ask you, like, what is your definition of leadership? And what principles do you rely on when you face your toughest moments as a leader?
What do I define as leadership? I think for me, leadership is really about recognizing that we all bring something to the table.
Right.
And a good leader learns to leverage all of the great parts of a team or a subset of people to actually deliver on whatever the goal is. That for me is true leadership. Right. Is knowing the strengths of every single person in that team or that group, or however you want to phrase it, and harnessing all of those strengths to create a really great outcome. What are the principles? I don't look at them as leadership principles. I just look at them as values that I live by. I want to treat people the way I want to be treated, at 100% all of the time. And I am very quick to say, I'm sorry, I got this wrong.
Right.
And I think I've shocked people on occasions. I have shocked juniors in my team when I said, you know what, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. You were right, I was wrong. And I will use words like that.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important that nobody's seen as infallible. We're all human at the end of the day. We all make mistakes. And being on that ever evolving journey of learning, for me, is key.
Yeah.
For somebody to be able to say to me, Elsie, you did this, and it upset me. And for me to say, do you know what, that was unintentional.
Yeah.
But there are there are consequences for actions all the time.
Yeah.
And I think for me that's key. Really, two things: treat people the way you want to be treated, and not being afraid, ashamed, embarrassed to say, I call that wrong,
Yeah.
or I was wrong.
Yeah.
And being vulnerable to that level, I think, is what makes a great leader.
Yeah.
Right? Because we all know our stuff. You don't get to where you get to and not know what you're about.
Yeah.
So the what is very rarely in question.
It's the how.
The how, that's always up for debate. And the how will differ for everybody. And it's knowing that you do your very best every single day.
Yeah.
That's what you can do.
Okay. That sounds like a quote.
Oh, right. I didn't mean it to be a quote.
No, but it's perfect. It's perfect. So it's so true, especially as you I'm an avid reader, so you hear me refer to like a lot of books a lot. And so there's this book that like what got you here won't get you there. I think it's
100%.
Yeah, and it's exactly
100%.
what you just said, completely different language, but just the how is the what is at some point not going to be in questions. I mean, how did you get here? But it's the how. Like, so as you get, fine tuning that communication style and all of those things, and being able to influence at a level that, and just, yeah, I think I'm learning that every day at this point in my career. And so it's just great to kind of hear you say that and really reinforce that point.
Yeah, and there are lots of things around leadership that we could all spend a little bit of time on. I talk a lot about courage of a leader, because as a leader, you've got to be able to, I said this, I was doing something at City a few months back, and I said, do you know what? I'm comfortable with the uncomfortable. And one of the things I've learned is that that's very unique. I just thought that's how everybody was, and it's not. I will lean into spaces that other people will shy away from.
Yeah.
But my view is always, well, if I don't do it, then who's going to do it? Especially when we're talking about race, gender issues, the intersectionality with that. If not me, then who? Right? Yeah. There are very few of us who have that voice, who have that platform. If I don't use the platform I have, nobody's going to come and advocate it for me. I have it for a reason. I have to use it, and I think we all have to. And one of the reasons, by the way, thank you again for inviting me. But one of the reasons I do things like this is because we are better together. That power of collaboration, we undervalue it. But actually, if we all came together, instead of everybody trying to do their own little thing and showcasing themselves in their own little spaces, we are better together. We are far more powerful when we collaborate. So, those things for me, from a leadership perspective, are just key.
Yeah. Absolutely. And even as you talk about courage, even just linking it to what you said before, like being vulnerable is like really a state of courage. It's being courageous. Like it's just not an easy thing to truly be authentic and be open and be able to apologize when things don't go over the way you thought, or you called it wrong, as you said. So even just the idea of vulnerability and courage or bravery, which is the word that I probably generally prefer to use, is kind of one and the same thing, I think. So no, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we're going to start winding down. I wish this could go on forever. But so as a mom of two boys who are like on their way to like uni, and a wife and a senior leader, like, what do you do for self-care? Because that feels like a lot of responsibilities. And I read a post that you put on LinkedIn a good few weeks ago now, and you use an anecdote that I usually use, where I say, like, put your own oxygen mask.
Yeah.
Max before you start helping anyone else, especially for those who like work with people and coach and do all that kind of stuff. You end up using an incredible reservoir of your energy. for other people and you don't always find the time to top up. So like, what is exciting for you, peaceful for you, restful for you? Like, what do you lean into when things get a little hectic?
Well, first of all, I have an amazing, amazing ecosystem of support. So I have my mom, I have my husband, two biggest cheerleaders ever. And so we are, my husband and I refer to ourselves as hashtag Team Akinsanya, right? So we hand off to each other with the boys and all of that stuff. And I was telling somebody that we've never had a nanny. Like we've never had a nanny, never had an au pair ever. But we're very fortunate. His mum lives not far. My mum lives not far. So we have that ecosystem. But also we hand off the baton to each other because I travel for work a lot. He works abroad sometimes. Crazy, but we make it work. In terms of what do I lean into? I love to walk. I'm a walker, and that's when I get my head space. That's where I get my downtime. That's where I get my quiet. That's where I get my best thoughts. That's when I write in my head, and then I write when I get home. I love to walk. I love nature. I'm not a runner, but I am a walker. I love, interestingly enough, to read, but I don't read educational books. I read really trashy novels. Really trashy novels. And that is because it's my distressor away from all things serious. Yeah, so name it that's trashy, I've probably read it.
You're in there.
I've probably read it. What else do I love? I love music. I love music and I like to move. Not very well, but I like to move. Good. Those are that's how I self-care. And I was at a spa yesterday with my mum, which was great.
Lovely.
I know. But best ever massage. More to come.
Very nice. Have you heard of a brand called Urban?
I have heard of the brand, never used it.
So they come to your house, and that's like a great one. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for
bring
that.
The massage bed and everything, and they can also. It's amazing.
Thank you for that. I've noted that. I have noted it. It will be happening in Shiz Akinsanya very soon.
I'm a regular, like, if I've had a hard week on Friday, I'm like, yep, I think I need a massage by Sunday. And I'm on app booking. Just
no, I've made a note. I've made a note. Good to learn.
Nice. Okay, so at this point in your career now, you've held like a senior leadership role for a while. When you think about like you in 5-10 years, like what's that picture of like your aspirational self? What does that look like at this stage?
So I mean 5 and 10 are two very different numbers for me.
Whatever you feel like you can see.
so what I can see is a next opportunity, and it could be anywhere, it could be doing anything, but it has to have two elements. One, it has to have impact. I cannot do something that is just I can't do a job. There is nothing in that for me. It has to be a role that creates a legacy. Right. That when I leave, people will say, this happened under X's leadership. That's really important for me. So there has to be impact in that role. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, aligned to that is there has to be learning. I don't want to plug and play. Mm-hmm. Because plug and play means you're not learning. Yeah. Plug and play means you've just swapped one seat for another seat. You're doing, a merry-go-round. I don't want to do that. I still want an opportunity to learn something different, right. To add something to my repertoire, because your skill set is never baked. Yeah. You should keep learning. So for me, that next role, whatever it is, has to have those two elements. Impact and learning. But if I look further beyond a next role, I think ultimately what I will strive to do, so if we did the 10-year view, it would be to have a portfolio of roles. So maybe some more board roles. I'm on one board now, probably get another board role 2022. To have a portfolio of board roles, likely, and do a lot of coaching. So I do a lot of executive coaching today at Citi. So I'm on Citi's coaching faculty. I do a lot of coaching of our CCOs, chief country officers, because we're present in 94 countries in the world. And I do a lot of transition coaching for people who are moving from one senior executive job to the other. Love to do more of that outside. So yeah, a mixture of coaching, non-exec board roles.
Yeah.
I think, if we look 10 years down the line, and just lots of traveling, like just get on a plane with my girlfriends or hubby or boys if they want to come, just that. Yeah. 100%. I love to travel.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to start wrapping up. And as I mentioned, I'm going to give you a little bit of a quiz.
Oh, I thought we'd forgotten these. Okay.
My favorite book, The Tribe of Mentors.
All right.
By Tim
All right, let's see.
So I love this book because, Tim sent a series of, a group of 11 questions to 100 people who are really high achieving people he admired, many he didn't know personally. And he asked them to pick 3 of any of the 11 questions and just kind of answer. And what came out of that was some really thoughtful answers to what seemed to be quite simple questions, but really questions that really unearthed a lot of thinking. Right. So I'm going to be asking you 3 of the 11 questions, taking a leaf from this book. But in order to pick which questions, you have to give me your birth dates.
So 14.
Right, okay.
1.
Yeah.
And I told you it ends with an O, so you said you were going to go with 10. So.
All right, so 14. So that means I'll pick question 4. I'll pick question 1, and I'll pick question 10. That works.
Do it.
Okay. Right, so question 4.
What happens if I don't have an answer?
You can pick another one.
Okay, cool.
Another one. But the challenge is to have an answer.
Okay, all right. Challenge accepted.
So if you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, metaphorically speaking, getting a message out to millions or billions of people, what would that billboard say and why?
So many that I love. Oh, can I pick 2? Well, one would be.
You went from what if I don't have an answer to can I pick 2?
Well. There's so many that I love, right? I love Run Your Own Race because our times and our seasons, they're all different, and so running your own race means that you're doing you. You're not competing with whoever is to your left or whoever is to your right. You are facing and focused and intentional about your race.
Yeah.
It's not anybody else's race, it's yours.
Yeah.
And it's for me, it's that sense of self-satisfaction, self-fulfillment. This world is full of too many people wanting to be like blah.
Right.
Best version of you.
Do you? Yeah.
Just be the best version of you. That's it.
I love that. I love that. I love that. So what's your second one?
Ooh, what's the worst thing that could happen?
I like that one.
I love that one because I always say, just try it, right? Yeah. If it fails, then it fails, but you tried. What is the worst thing that could happen?
Yeah.
Right? But if you don't try, you don't know.
Never know. Yeah.
Just do it. What's the worst thing that could happen? That's the worst thing that could happen, right? Yeah. Is that you fail, but you've tried.
Tried. Yeah. I love that. That was a question I asked myself when I was trying to make the decision to leave somewhere that I was extremely comfortable to go into a new environment. And I just thought, actually, what's the worst that can happen? It was actually someone I was talking to and said, like, actually, what's the worst? Actually, the way he framed it was probably a lot more, polished. He was kind of like, if you think about yourself in 2 years, do you think you would have grown more than where you are now? Like staying or leaving, where do you think you see yourself? Do you think you'd be better off in 2 years? Like, and then he ended the question with, what is really the worst that could happen?
Exactly.
I was like, oh, actually, when you put it that way, doesn't seem
100%.
doesn't seem so bad.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's 2 for question 4. I like it.
Good.
Question 1. What is the book or books that have been given most as a gift, and why?
That I have given most as a gift.
That you have given most as a gift.
Oh, I'm just looking at my bookshelf to see if it's still there. Because I must have ordered that book for a zillion people. It is a book by a lady called Francine Rivers.
Right.
And it's called Redeeming Love.
I have it here.
There you go. I must have ordered. In fact, Amazon probably thinks that I am Francine because I've ordered it for everybody. And I love it because it tells a really powerful story of love. And I read it first on my birthday. Somebody had actually gifted it to me. And it arrived the day before my birthday, and I opened it on my birthday, and I read it in about 4.5 hours, and I just sobbed through most of it because it's about
it's a great book. Okay, so last question from Tim Ferriss. And this is interesting because you actually said at the start, when I said I'm grateful we didn't land in the no category, you said, oh, I rarely say no. So this is gonna be a great question.
Okay.
Because it says, in the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to? I rarely
say no to things like this, truly, because I think they're important. I spoke to you about collaboration.
Yeah.
I have become better at saying no to things that I know that I am not going to enjoy, or that I'm not going to grow or develop through doing.
Yeah.
Like I'm in fact very quick to say no to those things. And increasingly unapologetic as well.
Yeah.
Because my time is precious.
Yeah.
So anything that's not going to add value to, I'm very good at saying no to those kind of things.
Yeah. Someone said to me the other day, like, no is actually a full sentence. And I was like, oof.
Let me tell you what I say to my mother, who does not say no to anything. She's the nicest person in the world. I say to her, Mom, no is not a swear word.
Yeah.
It's not a rude word. It's not a 4-letter word. It's no.
Yeah. And the fact that we always feel like we have to add the explanation. Like,
no.
You don't add an explanation when you say yes. So when you say no, why do you have to add the no because I'm doing X, Y?
No.
Just happening. That's it. No, it's a complete full sentence.
And we move on.
You can do this.
And we move on. Absolutely.
I like it. You see, that wasn't so bad.
No, it was not so bad. It was not so bad. You're absolutely right. It was not so bad. Yeah. But thank you.
You've shared a lot. You've shared a lot. I really want to narrow it down for the women, the people who are going to watch this, and really just want to just get that early advice. So like, what advice would you give? And this could probably be a wrapping question. What advice would you give to these sort of smart, driven students who are rushing at the pace of the millennial pace, which is just so fast? What advice would you give them about entering into the world of work? And also, what popular advice would you say they should ignore?
this is gonna show you that I'm not a curator of popular advice, because I tend to press delete on certain things, and literally filter it out of my thinking. But let me answer the first part of your question. What advice would I give? I give advice around being planning and preparation. I think far too often people just wing things, right? You have to prepare for something. And if anything is important, you have to show a level of prep around what you're delivering. So I think preparation and planning is key. You know, nobody ever plans to fail, but we all fail to plan sometimes. And I think planning is so key. So I think that's something I would really advise if you're going to an interview, if you're even filling in a form or applying for a job. Do your research, do some background checks, do your due diligence, please, right? Don't show up unprepared. I think that just shows a lack of discipline, to my mind. So for me, that's key. I think be persistent. Goes back to something I said earlier, which is, what's the worst thing that could happen, right? Keep trying. Okay, so you didn't get that job, you didn't get the other job, but you'll get a job. You have to be in it to win it. You have to stay in the game. I think I shared at the early years, I must have applied to 100 roles when I was trying to move into HR. I must have interviewed with about 25, but you'll get that one, and that one is the difference. So just keep at it. It will happen. But it will happen for you in your own time and in your own season. And you know what? Courage. I am a huge advocate of courage, right? Keep leaning in. Some stuff's going to be uncomfortable. Some stuff's going to be hard. But, I say to my friends, you got to pull up your big girl pants and go do. Just being tenacious, just hanging in there, going for it. I think, that there's a lot of popular myths around nowadays that, things are going to happen overnight. Nothing happens overnight. Nothing happens overnight. Well, let me rephrase. Nothing that is long-term and sustainable happens overnight. Maybe that's a better way to put it.
And I don't think there's a better statement that really end on than like nothing happens overnight. So you've had a fantastic career with lots going on, but it's a lengthy career. And so it just really, the points that you just made about just being, for preparing, being tenacious and persistent, being brave. And that's not the absence of fear. I'm sure there are moments where you're like, but just kind of, I guess, feeling the fear, but doing it
anyway.
Is kind of what we say. But no, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've learned so much. And I'm just gonna watch it again and again, honestly. And I get to do that because when I'm cleaning everything up, and I'll get to hear everything all over again and have my notes and all of that. But thank you so much for taking the time, an entire hour and a half of your time, and it's just been so well spent.
No, thank you for having me. It's been always a privilege, actually. I never take these things for granted, and a pleasure, always.
So, wow, what a fantastic conversation with Elsie Akinsoya. I honestly just learned so much from her as a leader, and in particular, quite impactful for me, given where I am, the stage that I'm at in my career as a leader, but one who's very much in growth phase and really building my brand, my leadership ethos, and just many other things. It really made me introspect as she talked about a lot of some of the shared values that we have, and just how she thinks about opportunities from a perspective of eliminating the things that she doesn't like, and then being then open to the world of possibilities, and maybe perhaps a narrower set of possibilities once she's eliminated the things that she didn't like. I really learned a lot about just, the things she mentioned about bravery and authenticity, but also being able to stop when you've made an error, when you've got it wrong, when you've called the mark wrong, being able to say, let's stop, I was wrong, let's start again. That really resonated with me in terms of a very strong leadership ethos. And in particular, when we spoke about communication style, which is one thing that I know that a lot of black female or female leaders definitely get a lot of feedback around our how. And what she talked about, just in the sense that there comes a point where your what is no longer in question, but it's really your how, and how you execute what you execute, how you influence, how you communicate, how you share your ideas in a way that people are more open to listening. That really resonated with me, and I'm sure it would resonate with you all as you listen. So it's just been excellent talking to Elsie, a formidable woman. I'm just grateful for her authenticity and her openness, her willingness to share just such thoughtful answers to the questions that we asked. And this is definitely one interview that I would be going back over and over again, because I think, there's just so much in there. And I really hope that you are inspired by listening to, a senior Black woman, a leader through and through, and that you can see yourself in her. And you can see the possibilities of a career, one that you enjoy, one that you are valued, one where your voice matters, one where you can be impactful, and one where you can learn and grow. And I think that's really what I've seen in this conversation with Elsie. So as we continue our intersectional leadership series, I really hope that you stay tuned. If you love this conversation, share it with your friends, share it with your frenemies, share it with your family, and subscribe, comment, and just come back for more, really, because we're just going to be meeting so many more amazing, phenomenal women. It is such an honor and a privilege for me to host these conversations. So definitely watch over and over, bring your notes out and share with your people. You never know, you might just be that person who's in between someone else who you love and the information, the inspiration, the insight that they need. So looking forward to the next conversation and looking forward to you coming back. So have a fantastic one and see you soon. Bye-bye.